So I was working on an anime video for last week, but I wasn't satisfied with the conclusions I came to in the script. And I almost forgot I was running a D&D campaign that weekend for some internet friends, so to frantically prepare things for that, said video will be out during this week instead. I wanted to make a video quickly going over some futurism concept I was musing about. I think I briefly discussed a related concept on the last BYR, the Fermi paradox. This is sort of in the same vein as that. The concept in question being the doomsday argument. The doomsday argument refers to a simple statistical assumption. It could be explained with a number of long-winded hypotheticals, but I think explaining it plainly would be better. Imagine you are a ghost that exists beyond the universe. You are floating in space in the soul assignment office and are waiting to have your soul put into a conscious body within time and space. You chat with the desk receptionist. They tell you you are to get randomly assigned a body out of all humans that will exist. The receptionist tells you that you are to be born in whatever year that you, the viewer, were born in and whatever country you hail from. You are sent away from Ghostland to live in the human world in your current body. Using this cartoonish model of how people's consciousness is assigned, one sets out the assumption that people as observers are born randomly along every human throughout history. For example, under this model, you had some percentage chance of being born as an early caveman or medieval peasant, but were instead born into the modern day. And many of you would consider this lucky given the safety, technology, and material comfort we all enjoy in the current year. But consider the people that are to be born into the future. If humanity develops spacefaring technology, say in the next 1,000 years, then colonizes the stars for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, then the number of people who exist is more than a quintillion to the factor of many tens. Various spacefaring technologies will allow people to live almost an infinite number as they colonize various planets and build space stations that can sustain themselves indefinitely. Mathematically speaking, the number of people who have been born and died in the current day, humans overall throughout history, is about 100 billion people. Then, statistically speaking, assuming you were randomly assigned when and where you were born, are you not extremely unlucky? Would it not have been preferable to be born in the far future, where even more fantastic technology and capability exist? Being born in the first 100 billion humans of many quintillion humans is an astronomically low probability. Like winning the lottery 5 times in a single year. This statistical fact sort of carries a scary consequence. If the probability of you being born in the first 100 billion humans out of all humans to live ever is extremely unlikely, it may also be that quintillions of humans don't end up existing and humanity dies long before expanding throughout the galaxy as envisioned by science fiction. In that case, it is particularly unlikely for you to be born in the current world because humanity is doomed and will perhaps die in the next 100 billion births and deaths. This is the doomsday argument in a nutshell, which has befuddled philosophers for a while who argue against it on many points but are ultimately unable to refute its primary premise. Now, the argument relies on many assumptions, one that humanity will grow and develop and there will be many more observers throughout time, the other being that your own existence is a sample of a huge swath of other existences. Another possibility is that humanity does expand, but in fact never goes extinct even at the end of the universe during heat death. Thus, infinite humans exist and continue to exist, and you have an equal chance of being born as any thanks to how infinity interacts with probability. However, relatively speaking isn't true infinity, it is bounded on the 0 point humanity did have a start, and being in that first set of 100 million people is still fairly unlucky in relative terms. There are longer papers trying to debunk and go over why the doomsday argument is wrong, but ultimately I think the basis is sound. Whether humanity goes digital or modifies its genes or spreads to every corner of the galaxy, it would be extremely improbable to be born in the current time, which indicates that in our universe, either we personally are extremely unlucky, or humanity has a high percentage chance of dying off before long. Ultimately, it is just a fun thing to think about, like the simulation hypothesis, and doesn't really grant a person who believes in it anything but some sort of smug mortal knowledge that nobody else will get to go be space captain without them after they're dead. This observation is obviously predicated on the model of humans being randomly assigned where they are born. This sort of amorphous soul concept where the body is a blank slate and a consciousness is inserted into it, sort of a vague thing. Although there is no scientific justification for the soul, it does lead to some interesting statistical thought experiments. Another observation some of you may have heard of based on the same concept is Rawls' theory of justice. Rawls was an economist who argued that because people are born in this way, randomly assigned from some amorphous ghost realm, the most just society is one in which the minimum level of welfare/utility of an individual is raised because this ghost person wouldn't want to be assigned to a life of absolute squalor and pain. For example, I doubt many of you would want to be born as a child soldier in some African shithole. Rawls would argue that a just society would eliminate the existence of any sort of child soldier, so no unborn person would have to suffer such a fate. However, I don't agree with Rawls, not because his philosophy is some sort of utopian and namby-pamby nonsense, but because its premise is logically flawed. If the ghost being that we discussed earlier was floating above the world, their preference on the distribution of welfare and wealth in society would be based on their risk preference. For example, if the ghost was a cautious nit bitch who wanted to have zero risk of living in squalor, they would support Rawls to avoid the worst-case scenario being bad. However, if the ghost was a bit of a gambler or even mildly rational, they would want a high chance of being very rich over a guaranteed chance of being mediocre and poor. For example, most ghosts would prefer a world where 90% of the society were rich Saudi oil barons and lived like kings, while 10% were dirt slaves, to one where the poorest person was an American burger flipper. Most people would probably take the 9 out of 10 chance at being massively rich over the guarantee of comfort, and thus Rawls' assumption that everyone should agree with raising the minimum welfare falls flat on his unborn person morality model. Those two concepts were the main things I wanted to muse over with this video. One more thing I was pondering was that if the technology ever existed for achieving immortality, whether it be genetic modification or cyborg surgery, even if it was super expensive or guarded, many people would resort to stealing and killing and breaking the law to try and obtain it. After all, from a rational perspective, if one option is dying a mortal death, and the other option is living forever if you pull off a big heist, then even otherwise moral people might be tempted to action. After all, you are going to die either way, so breaking the law and dying in shame isn't a big deal if the reward is immortal life as a cyborg or uber-modified man. I think this observation is somewhat comforting because if the elite ever hid this technology or tried to keep it super expensive to keep it out of the hands of the plebeians would rightfully riot in the streets. Many would resort to extreme measures to gather money, or kidnap doctors who could perform the surgery, or kidnap rich people who could get the surgery done for them. So I don't think there will be a future where some tiny class of people use technology to become super immortals because literally every immoral materialist would simply attack them violently, ignoring the law and life and limb, because they have some chance of getting immortality. Already, this is why many of the elderly in developed countries see no issue with crashing society's wealth to prolong their lives fighting chronic diseases. Because from a purely utilitarian materialist standpoint, prolonging one's life is worth any cost, even shame or hurting others. Perhaps a nasty side effect of the elites destroying the morals of society and making everyone greed monsters is that the commons will easily betray them in violent fashion if this technology is ever discovered and hoarded. For example, if a single country developed this technology before anybody else, every other country would immediately begin trying to steal it, reproduce it, or even go to war to try and take it by force, with no regard for consequences. Any number of petty dictators, bureaucrats, or otherwise would try to use their military might or influence to gather this technology for themselves so they too can become immortal god kings. So inevitably, if this technology is ever developed, I don't think it will be hoarded for long because it would cause widespread chaos and violence everywhere. The technology would spread and become at least somewhat affordable to prevent the uprising of anybody who wants it. Of course, this may come with many caveats, as sci-fi often explores, with a company owning your body parts or some sort of nefarious control or kill switch that is able to be exploited to control the populace. I'm not some Kurzweil futurist who thinks this technology will be developed within my lifetime, but I do have some optimism for how technology development will go in the future and how it will provide humanity some freedom, both politically and socially. I think we are merely in the bad phase of technological upheaval, where the societal need to maintain and use various technologies oppresses people more than it helps them. I think as technology gets better, it will become more freeing and useful to the average person than it is now. I'm sure some of you in the comments will disagree with this. Feel free to comment with how wrong I am on anything I talked about in this video.